Hey Beer Geeks, now a few weeks ago an article called Lost in the Haze was published on North American beverage news website Just Drinks, and it was claiming that Hazy IPA was causing sales stagnation in the craft beer industry by stopping innovation, knocking other styles off of the shelves, and as far as I can tell, boring brewers. Now, spoiler alert, that's absolute nonsense. So this video is not meant to be a hit piece on that article. There have been enough of those already, and I've taken a few weeks to cool my beer geek rage and stick to the facts. And I'm going to use those to have a discussion about what I think the writer was really trying to get to, which is, longer term, will Hazy IPA have a negative effect on beer culture? Spoiler alert, again, it won't. I don't think. Now, we have a video about what Hazy IPA actually is and what its history is, and I'm not going to dig too much into that, but essentially it started in about 2003, pretty much with this beer, Heady Topper from The Alchemist, and John Kimmich and Greg Noonan, who were brewing beers like this, which was basically reintroducing British ale yeast character into IPAs, but keeping that bitterness, and resulting in a slightly hazy beer by accident, which was then run away with by lots of breweries who made it hazier, richer, velvetier, juicier, and to the anger of many beer writers and drinkers later on, reducing the bitterness. Now, if you're a beer drinker in the modern world, you know exactly what happened next. Hazy IPA, New England IPA, whatever you want to call it, basically took over the world. You know, if you go into a tap room, you go into a bottle shop, you go into a pub, it's pretty likely there'll be a Hazy IPA on, and if it's a real craft beer bar, like with lots of taps, it's pretty likely it will dominate those taps. I am not going to deny that Hazy IPA, in this little beer bubble that we exist in, and to some extent bleeding outwards, is taking over. It is the dominant style of the day, and almost the flagship style of craft beer as a whole. So we're going to have two conversations in this video, two conversations that the Craft Beer channel has kind of avoided over the years a little bit, but they're really important to have. The first conversation is what that article was talking about, which is whether Hazy IPA is causing stagnation in terms of innovation and sales and culture short term. And the second conversation, which I think is what the article was really trying to get to, is whether longer term it will cause anything like that. So the first assertion is absolute nonsense. If anything, Hazy IPA is propping up and saving craft beer. And even the article itself mentions right at the top things like COVID. It doesn't mention the war in Ukraine or anything that has caused incredible inflation in Europe, incredible rises in ingredient costs, particularly for malt. And also, you know, it's come as part of this cost of living crisis that has come out of COVID. Those are the reasons why craft beer might be, and we'll talk about that in a second, stagnating. The actual truth is that craft beer is doing okay. So in the latest numbers from the Brewers Association in the US, and I'll mostly talk about the US and the UK here, it grew as sort of a part of the entire pie of beer by 0.2%. Now that is not bad given everything that it's going through, given all the things that I've mentioned. And in the UK, the data isn't quite as strong, but tellingly, SIBA, the Society of Independent Brewers, in their survey, the 2023 craft beer report, they said that 63% of their respondents, so the smallest independent craft brewers in the UK, are expecting growth this year. So clearly things are not quite as dark as they're being painted, and clearly craft beer itself, compared to the rest of the beer industry, is doing all right. Now, obviously, that comes off of decades of pretty strong double-digit growth in the craft beer industry, so it's worth having a look at whether Hazy IPA has slowed that or whether it's the other factors. Now, there's no denying that Hazy IPA has grown extremely fast within that little bubble. And a great example, actually, I saw on Beer Aficionado, a great TikToker, Instagrammer account. He's head of marketing for Revolution Brewing in Chicago, and he does great industry analysis. And he showed me that actually in California and now the rest of the US, Hazy Little Thing, so the Session Hazy IPA from Sierra Nevada, now outsells Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. Now, depending on your perspective, that is either a terrible bit of news or it's like, hey, cool, they found their way through this little change in craft beer. Either way, what it proves is that Hazy IPA is pretty fundamental to the survival of really big breweries, and inevitably all the little ones where you go and there's 20 taps in a brewery or a tap room or a pub, and 10, 15 of them are hazy pales, hazy IPAs, session IPAs, all that kind of thing. So it's really, really important to point out that as volumes have been really hard to find, increasing volumes have been really hard to find for small brewers, hazy IPA has been a great way to ensure you keep growing, or ensure you keep those customers interested, or ensure that you continue growing and keep your taproom busy. Hey Big Geeks, this is just a quick paid advertisement from BetterHelp. If you're a long-time subscriber to our channel or our podcast, you'll know how open Brad and I are about our mental health. With a passion like ours, it's super important to know that you're drinking for the right reasons, for the flavours, for the experiences, for the social cohesion, and for the relaxation that it can bring. And it's so easy for drinking to go from a joyful and positive pastime to something that actually starts to bring you down and harms your mental and physical well-being. We also know that most of our audience are men, and as a gender we struggle to open up. Now, I've used therapy a couple of times in my life, and finding someone you can trust, open up to and get helpful feedback from is really, really important, and has got more important as I've started to run this channel and indeed my own business. That's why we're delighted to have teamed up with BetterHelp for this video. BetterHelp connects you with a credentialed therapist who's trained to listen and give you unbiased, helpful advice. Better yet, after answering a few questions, BetterHelp will connect you with a therapist who's trained to talk about the topics that you want to get off your chest, usually within 48 hours. And you can conduct your session by phone, video call, or even messaging, whatever's most comfortable. It's the easiest possible way to start talking to a therapist, and you can use our link, betterhelp.com/craftbeerchannel. Now back to the video, love and beer. Now, the criticism that I've seen in that article, and see it all the time in the comment section across all of our channels, is that these people who are drinking hazy IPA are lazy craft drinkers, as in they're only sticking to the styles that they know and they enjoy, and inevitably that's probably going to be hazy IPA. Now, a couple of points to that. Firstly, what's wrong with that? Drink what you enjoy. Secondly, how do we know that? Has anybody done a study into whether hazy IPA fans progress to other things? I'd imagine that most of the people that really enjoy our content on the Craft Beer channel started with a hazy IPA. I didn't start with a hazy IPA. I got into craft beer before that really kicked on, but I'm not going to lie, my real love for craft beer really, really kicked off 2015, 2016, when we brewed a hazy IPA with Gypsy Hill. Cloudwater brought out Dipper V3 and then the whole Dipper series. That was an incredibly exciting time in craft beer, and that sent me on lots of other journeys, including to visit breweries like this and like this in the States, and really that is where the Craft Beer channel kicked on. So until there's a study into where people enter the craft beer segment and where they go after that, you're just spouting an opinion, to be honest. And there's nothing wrong with opinions. You can absolutely have them if they're anecdotal and you've witnessed it, great. But let's not dismiss the most important thing that's happened to craft beer in the last decade based off of you sat in a taproom watching people drinking hazy IPA. The actual really important question is whether those people would have entered the craft beer segment if there wasn't hazy IPA to drink. And I think that it would be much easier to demonstrate that hazy IPA has brought more drinkers in, created more sales, created more excitement, created more marketing opportunities than any other style has pretty much before. And that said, it's also worth remembering that this is still a really small segment of the craft beer industry. So according to sales data in the US, about 7% of beers, craft beers sold are hazy IPAs. Now, that's a tiny, tiny proportion. So how is that the thing that is supposedly dragging craft beer down? Surely that 7% is the one that's creating that 0.2% growth of the overall pie. It's much more likely that that's the case. In the UK, and I have to estimate because our data here absolutely sucks, it's probably even a smaller proportion of craft beer sales. And within that I include cask beer, which is actually about 4 times the size of the craft keg segment. And if you don't consider cask craft, then I might have to make a video about you too. So I've touched lightly on the reasons that I think that craft beer might be stagnating or struggling, and I think the reason that most brewers would say that it is as well, and that is huge increase in costs for ingredients and for energy. The cost of living crisis, which means that they're paying more to produce their beer and people are less willing to pay for it. It's a crowded market out there. There's over 9,000 breweries in the US. There's more opening than closing still, and the UK is seeing a big contraction of breweries, but still there's about 2,000 in the UK, where 25 years ago, there were less than 100. And another big issue in the craft beer industry, in the UK at least, is debt from COVID. So these COVID loans given out by the government, or indeed by banks or anyone else, that these breweries are having to pay off on top of everything else. That's been particularly clear in breweries that expanded just before COVID, didn't know it was coming, got themselves a big debt pile, and then their volumes fell off a cliff. And that's a major reason why North Brewing, one of the most celebrated and exciting craft breweries in the UK, actually went under at the start of this year. Now, this to me suggests that actually Hazy IPA is more of a symptom of stagnation than the cause, because all of these issues make Hazy IPA more inevitable. For one, breweries are going to stop innovating. They're going to produce stuff that they know will sell, whether it's to distributors, bottle shops, or through their tap room. It also means that they're going to be looking at higher margin beers. So you can sell more, get more cash margin, more actual pounds in your bank if you sell a beer for £8 than a beer for £4. For the same reason, distributors, whatever country you're in, are also going to want those beers because they want those easy sales, they want that high margin, and they know that that beer's not going to be sat in their warehouse or wherever, clogging up new beers coming in. So basically, all of these struggles, the travails that these breweries are having, is encouraging them to brew the stuff that people are clamouring for. And one of the things in that article that really frustrated me was just a little flippant sentence that just sort of said, do people actually want to drink IPA, or are they being marketed or sold to so hard about these styles that they end up drinking it? And I think that's really quite patronising to drinkers and really quite naive as to why people drink. If that were the case, they might have one when they come in so they look cool, or they've tried it and they've ticked that box, but then they move on. But that is not the sales data from any brewery I have ever been to. These people are drinking Hazy IPA because it's delicious. Brewers might not find it delicious, totally accept that, and I know lots of brewers that would rather not have to brew it. And beer writers might not find it delicious. They've been brought up in a very different beer world where bitterness was everything with IPA. But that does not mean that other people won't find it delicious. You can't project your palate onto somebody. So if Hazy IPA is more likely to be the thing that's saving your local brewery and helping your regional brewery grow, the question isn't, is Hazy IPA causing stagnation in craft beer? I think the causes for that are clear, and clearly not Hazy IPA. The real question is, what are the longer term effects of having so much Hazy IPA out there in the world right now, and probably for many years to come? Now, I make this point all the time on the channel that we need to have more context and be more historical when we dig down into sort of the wider issues in the craft beer industry. Hazy IPA, at best, is about 20 years old, but really, in terms of being a real craze, in terms of a real trend, it's maybe a decade. Certainly in the States, a little bit less elsewhere in the world. So we've got a decade here. We've been brewing beer for about 13,000 years, probably longer. And in that time, I don't know about the trends back in Sumeria, but I certainly do know about the trends in the UK and in the US from about the 1800s. And all of these locations, all of these times have a beer that dominated. Porter dominated the UK craft beer, the UK brewing industry for about 150 years. And in fact, the breweries got so big that they dominated most of the world, and porter was sent absolutely everywhere. More porter was sent to India than IPA, India Pale Ale. Porter had its day. It didn't do any damage. In fact, it caused incredible commercial success, incredible investment in unlikely places, smaller places. Places like Burton was literally built on beer. So that's had a really positive effect. And after porter went away in the UK, we had mild. And after mild went away, we had bitter. And after bitter went away, we had like macro pilsner. Not our strongest phase. And then after that, craft beer sort of had its moment. Although, like I say, it's still less than 5% of all the beers sold. And within that, there's only about 1% Hazy IPA. So we know that trends come and go. And we know that beer brewing survives these things. In the US, they didn't really drink beer until the mid sort of 1850s with huge German and Irish immigration. They then invented the American Pilsner with Budweiser, Coors, Miller, Pabst, all these big breweries founding themselves on that. That was probably hugely damaging to competition, although Prohibition has to take its blame. But now, that's where the craft beer revolution started. Out of these forest fires, you get fertile ground for new things. So there's absolutely no reason to think that A, something won't come and take over Hazy IPA's place as sort of the flagship style of craft beer or of beer in general. And there's also no reason to think that while it is here, it's going to do any damage whatsoever. Beer is cyclical. It is fashion. It is trend driven. And yes, there's, jeans, this stuff that just never goes away. Blue jeans that will always be, depending on what you accessorize with them, will always be trendy, right? And that probably is great lager, and it probably is great IPA in some kind of form now. But we know that things are going to change again, and probably change pretty quickly, because everything in the world has sped up since the 1800s and porter ruled the waves. The thing that I think that we should take from that article, take from what the brewers are saying, take from what the writer's saying, and also that we take from the comments, and also when we look at breweries' profiles, their social media, and the comments that are there, is that if we don't want the proliferation of Hazy IPA to do any damage, if we don't want lazy drinkers, whatever that means, to just stick to what they know, then that's up to us as influencers, writers, brewers, drinkers, distributors. And the best way we can do that is to educate, is to get people excited about different styles. Hazy IPA brewers and hop growers as well have been so good at getting people excited about new hop varieties, about innovative GM or non-GM yeasts, about even increasingly, and we've tried to do this, is get people excited about malt. What malts are going into these Hazy IPAs? What's making them hazy? Is there something, little twists on it? And when we come up with new innovation now, and I would say there's plenty of innovation going on, we're coming up with things like West Coast Pilsners and stuff, where we're getting these big IPA kind of character, but we're getting it to more drinkable and also more traditional recipes. And I think that's absolutely wonderful and a real strength of Hazy IPA. As always in the craft beer industry, we've pushed things to extremes to find out what's possible and then reined it in when we've found sort of that perfect balance. That's what happened with the IBU arms race of the, I guess, early 2010s and a little bit earlier with American IPA. And it's starting to happen, I think, with Hazy IPAs. Things get less thick, less velvety, less cloudy to some extent. So how do we get people excited about other styles? Well, we do that a lot on the Craft Beer channel. We tell the history, we tell the context, we meet the brewers, we explain flavour-wise why it might have something you could really connect with. And that, that comes down to the people on, sorry for the cliche, the coalface of craft beer. So it's the people selling the beer in the pubs and the tap rooms and the bottle shops. It's the marketers that have that direct access to the consumers. And in particular, it comes down to the breweries with the really big followings that are very reliant on those styles. And it's been wonderful to see breweries like Treehouse, like Cloudwater, like Verdant here in the UK, and lots of others aside, actually, who are now brewing all kinds of different styles, putting it in front of and pushing it in front of Hazy IPA drinkers. And I would imagine that is working really quite well. And I'd love to have a chat with some of those breweries. In fact, maybe I will for a video to see how that's going. How is Verdant's Hellas selling compared to how it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago with all the work that they've done, A, on the beer and B, on the marketing. So at the end of the day, I consider, that article and all the conversations that come around with it as, a textbook case of gatekeeping. It is, we love that people are coming into the craft beer industry, but they're drinking the wrong beer. And what is that going to do? That's not going to encourage people to stay in this beer industry. It is pure gatekeeping, and it is pure snobbery. And the thing that those people need to remember, and that I need to remember, everybody needs to remember, is that Hazy IPA is doing an incredibly important role right now. Well, a couple of important roles. One, it's bringing new people in. Two, it's being absolutely bloody delicious, and we love every single one that's made well. And three, it's propping up and creating actually more space for different styles. So yes, it may take up a quarter, a half, 2/3, 3/4 of a tap list in any given bar or tap room or bottle shop. But what it means is those businesses are thriving and surviving. It's bringing people through those doors where we can have those conversations about different styles, and it's ensuring that those businesses actually exist right now in a time of unprecedented change and challenge in the wider world and indeed in the beer industry. So I don't care if you go into a tap room and there's 15 Hazy IPAs on tap. Yes, I'd like more diversity, but the fact that there's five other styles in that tap room or pub that could have closed over COVID, the fact that it's still there, it's still slinging out loads of pints, and I can still get myself a beautiful Czech Pilsner or an Oud Bruin or something because the bar staff want to put something they're passionate about on tap as well is just joyous. So is Hazy IPA killing craft beer? No, it's saving it right now. Will it kill it in the future? Incredibly unlikely if we've learned anything from history and if we actually look at the craft beer industry around us. All we have to do is ensure that all the wonderful new people that are coming in and getting excited about this both feel welcome, but also feel like they're not being talked down to as we talk about other styles. And I make a pledge on the Craft Beer channel to try my absolute best to toe that line, to tell those stories, to encourage diversity in terms of the people coming in and the styles being brewed and the businesses that are making it. And we can make sure that from this tough time, which has nothing to do with Hazy IPA, by the way, other than the fact it's helping, does not affect the longer term industry, an industry that I deeply love and deeply passionate about. And until a couple of years ago was just full of joy and excitement about where the world was going. And I hope we can bring that back. Well, I guess the best phrase to end this on is love and beer. Cheers.